Kristen Graziano. And as everybody knows, Sheriff Graziano won a historic election just last year, defeating Sheriff Al Cannon, who'd been sheriff of Charleston County since 1988. He hadn't been sheriff quite as long as Mayor Riley had been mayor of Charleston, but it was almost as long. And I think he represented a tradition in Charleston, which particularly privileged the idea of law enforcement. And I would say, slightly riskily perhaps, that it was law enforcement on behalf of the property owning classes going way, way back. And Sheriff Graziano is committed to, I think, a slightly different notion of law enforcement that is absolutely for the purposes of protecting and defending. So we're really, really pleased to have her on. She has herself 32 years worth of experience, first in Charlottesville and then down here in Charleston. And she has won numerous awards, including an award for valor from the South Carolina Sheriff's Association and the President's Award from the South Carolina Law Enforcement Officers Association in 2011. So we're really, really pleased to have her here talking about her goals and expectations for a new era of policing and sheriff's office in Charleston County. So I'll hand over straight away to Sheriff Kristen Graziano. Welcome.
Thank you, Simon, and thank all of you all for being here today and giving of your time to share with me concerns that you might have. As Simon said, I am Kristen Graziano, the newly elected Sheriff of Charleston County. I don't think I've ever been able to say that, anyone's ever been able to say that if you were born before the 1988. So I am not a career politician. And luckily for you all, I'm not a preacher, but someone who rather jumped into a race that many believed was against impossible odds. In fact, it was 1 year ago tomorrow that I officially filed my candidacy to run for sheriff. And this is something that I, just so you all know, that I had seriously contemplated about 2 years prior, working with the group in an effort to see if this was even a possibility. But a year ago, however, I found myself in a position in my life where I was no longer employed. And after having spent my entire adult life in public service, having 2 kids in college, and a world that was quite literally shutting down before my eyes because of a pandemic. If ever there was a time for panic, this was the moment. But for me, it became a moment of transformation. Many of you remember vividly how life just really slowed down, and we all became these, like we are now, digital figures on a computer and a phone screen, full of fist pumps, elbow taps, air hugs. We were forced to look once again into each other's eyes because it was the only visible expression above our nose piece behind our very creative mask. And we coined that term smizing, smiling with your eyes. And whenever we could, whenever we had the chance, we smized at one another, despite all the uncertainty in our lives, in our jobs, and especially in the world around us. That was unfortunately the beginning of our new normal. But I'll tell you, during this period, I became acutely aware and in touch with the pulse of my community. I had been marching with them, protesting with them, lifting them up, feeding them, embracing them, and really just listening to them. And on May 11th, some of you were actually joined me on this. I organized a 2.23 mile virtual run for Ahmaud Arbery on what it would have been his 26th birthday. Ahmaud was gunned down in a seemingly racist attack while jogging in a neighborhood that he lived in at 2:23 in the afternoon, just 4 months earlier. And it followed a pattern of deaths of Black men and women at the hands of white people, many unfortunately wearing a police uniform. I remember the debates and the discussions that really ensued after that video was released and how much outrage it sparked. And it was a clear indicator to me that we have much work to do when it comes to racial relations. But then I thought, how could we? How could we work towards healing when the highest levels of our government were inciting racially motivated hate, homophobia, xenophobia, and just hate speech that was becoming accepted practice on our airwaves and, quite frankly, all over social media, which right now everyone still lives on. You know, I recognize that protests are not uncommon in our country. In fact, if it weren't for protests and civil unrest and sometimes violence, I wouldn't be in the position I'm in today to serve you or to vote. And for many of our brothers and sisters, they wouldn't have access to public education or even ride a bus. So if it weren't for protests, we wouldn't have access to body cam footage to tell a more accurate story of police interactions. John C. Calhoun would still be standing in Marion Square, and the Confederate flag would still be flying at our nation's capital or at our state capital or state house. I think protests are just an avenue to start the discussion and to demand action. But it was a little different on May 25th. May 25th, that changed drastically. And after 8 minutes and 46 seconds, the world watched the man die under the knee of a police officer, and the narrative became much more intense. This time it was different. Locally, many of you know this, the Band-Aids were just literally ripped off the wounds of a community that was desperately trying to heal from its own very wounded past. I just kept seeing the images of Walter Scott retreating only to be gunned down by a police officer. And just months later, this horrific recollection of the 9 parishioners executed in a church just blocks from where we all worship. I watched the video of George Floyd once. That's all it took. And I physically became ill. I remember that day clearly calling 2 people I trusted for guidance. One was my minister, and the other was a very good friend who happened to be Black. And I always looked to him for answers when we had unrest like this. And while I listened to him recite history as he knows it as a Black man, I couldn't help think how badly our system had failed them, and to allow our brothers and sisters to continue this fight. It was just making me physically ill. And I'll tell you, I've always walked with them, but never in their shoes. But this time I could feel the pain in his voice. It was really palpable. It was the following 2 days after that event, I continued to feed our community as I'd been doing throughout my campaign. But the mood with our usually really jovial group that I worked with, volunteers, was quieter. It was more serious. And the sadness that they felt was really visceral. The message, I'll let you know that the message in my campaign had always been one of transparent policing practices and holding folks accountable. But I was no longer the only one saying this. The world was now saying this. And on May 25th, that audience grew. So I'll fast forward real quick to November 4th, 2020. As Simon was saying, a historic election where voter turnout nationally was exceeded any other election in our entire country had ever had. And after this really tumultuous year of unknowns, people gathered by mail and in person to really exercise their collective voice to vote. And despite the summer of civil unrest, record joblessness, and disease that by now had taken over 300,000 lives, they still held out that hope for a new day. So I woke up that morning at 4 a.m. That was normal for me. So it wasn't any excitement. That was very normal. And I gathered my staff at my house at 6. And it was our plan to physically run to my precinct, which is about 1.5 miles away, and cast my own ballot. For the past 26 days prior to this, I had pledged to run a marathon, 1 mile a day, 26 days straight, a mile in a different jurisdiction or different precinct each day. But this particular day was my sprint finish. So in support of so many people that I respect that came before me, I donned my pearl necklace for Kamala. I grabbed my RBG figurine and had her in my hand and put her in my hoodie for good luck, laced up my shoes and headed out. And I decided that morning to go the extra mile. So we took a different route. And by the time we got to our precinct, that we had just run just over 3 miles, arriving right about 7 a.m., just in time to stand in line to cast my own vote. And I will tell you, the rest of the day was just a blur. I had planned on going to visit volunteers throughout the county in really just a day of gratitude, to thank them for lifting me up through this very, very tough campaign, and thank them for walking with me all those months, despite their own challenges. I refused the entire day, and this is the truth, to watch any election results. I refused to look at the results. I kept telling my staff they had nothing to worry about, that we were going to be okay. And about 3:30 that next morning, with 97% of the precincts reporting, and my lead was quite sizable, my campaign manager, Amber, convinced me to ride with her to the election headquarters. She couldn't do it. She couldn't stand it anymore. And we walked in the door, and right after we walked in, we were informed that the 100%, the final results had been posted. And she asked the guy in the facility, she said, "Did she win?" And the guy just looked at her like she was crazy and said, "I have no idea." So we ran back to the car, and she got on her laptop and pulled up the results. And I'm not going to lie, I was already enjoying a celebration sip at that point. It was 3:30 in the morning, and I said, "What the heck?" So within about a minute, Amber looked over to me and said, "Congratulations, Sheriff." And we embraced. And I said, "Yeah, I guess I should go home and wake Elizabeth up." That's my wife. She was asleep. You know, on the ride home, I told Amber, "Look, I won on March 15th when I filed. I won on May 11th when I ran for a mod. I won on May 25th. And at 7 a.m. on November 4th, I knew change was coming. I didn't need to wait for the results. I knew, and my community had already told me." So just fast forward a little faster. 2 months into office, we're already seeing an agency that is beginning to look like the community it serves. We identified our core values, and as a valued community member, not us versus them, but as part of the community, we are working daily to enhance what our core values are, and they spell pride. And that stands for public trust, taking responsibility for our actions, being inclusive and accepting, increasing diversity within our walls, and treating all people equally. We are proud of our community, and we know we have much work to do. We take pride in our profession, understanding that we have the power, really the power to change lives. And we are proud that we don't just say what you want to hear. We do the hard work, because we know without tangible change, there will be no peace. We know we must do this through self-examination, whether through a racial bias audit or through some diversity forums that we host weekly, and through communication and putting into practice what we are learning about ourselves. We accept the fact that we haven't always gotten it right, and we make sure we work every day to be our best selves. In fact, the first day of the swearing in, when I started swearing in officers, that's what I was saying to them: work every day to be your best self. That is what we're doing within our walls. And until we fix what's broken in our walls, we can't serve our community outside of them until we know how. So I thank you for inviting me here today, and I am happy to answer any questions you have. And luckily for you, again, I am not a preacher, so I'm happy to answer whatever questions you all might have of me.
Thank you so much, Sheriff. This is absolutely wonderful. I love the idea of you going the extra mile with RBG and your hoodie and your pearls around your neck. That's fantastic. And you mentioned Amber, your campaign manager. Amber was one time a member of the UU congregation here. So I think we can probably claim you as a victory supported by the UU Church. And I know the ACLU also gave you a huge amount of assistance in the campaign. And I'm sure most of us on this call are big supporters of the ACLU. So please, folks, if you want to use the raise hand feature in the reactions section of the tabs, or put questions in the chat, that would be fantastic. I'm sure there are loads out there. I'm not seeing any at the moment, so maybe I can just ask you immediately, Sheriff, about the question of cooperation with ICE. I know that was an issue with you and with the former sheriff.
Yeah, so there's some interesting stories that ensue after that. But yeah, so for those of you that don't know what that means, is the federal government has a program called 287G, and essentially it is the federal government's immigration service out to local law enforcement, essentially deputizing them to do their work. It's a force multiplier for the government. We have participated since 2005 in Charleston County with this program. It was shortly after the new facility, new jail was built in 07, that they needed to find a way to fill the space because they had overbuilt a facility. So they signed up to be a participant in the 287G through the former sheriff. And what that did was deputize 16 people within the jail to identify folks that were undocumented. And when they identified those folks, after those people would pay their fines, these were for minor violations. These weren't violent crimes. They ranged from broken taillights to simple possession charges, relatively minor stuff that you could pay the fine or pay your bond and then go home and wait for your trial. So after those cases were adjudicated and these folks paid their money, they were then put on a civil detainer through our detention center. And when they were put on a civil detainer, they weren't allowed to be released. ICE would come in and remove them and take them to, it would be Atlanta, the Georgia office. And then from Georgia, they would go back to a country, their home country. In many cases, these folks had nobody in that country. So many of them had never been to that country. So on day one of my campaign, or my swearing in, that afternoon, I met with a lot of supporters in the Brown community, the Hispanic Latinx community, and I rescinded that agreement with ICE. And that was in an effort, and I will tell you, I did apologize for being complicit. That was something that they needed to hear, and we needed to say as law enforcement, but that was something that was very important to me. And it was just one step, it's just the first step in trying to rebuild our relationship with that community that has been targeted for so many years.
Thank you. I see the questions are rolling in now. Go in following order, if you can remember this, folks. So Libby up first, then Susan Thomas, then Ray and Ellie Setzer, then Kevin Gainey, and then Diane. So first up, please, Libby, if you want to ask your question. You have to unmute yourself to do so. Libby, unmute, please.
I wondered if you're looking at making any change in the way your officers are trained. That seems to be kind of a national issue.
Oops.
I can't hear her. Can other people?
Yeah, you
All
need
right,
to
Libby, all right, Libby, I heard you.
Okay.
I'm back. So Libby, just last week, the George Floyd Reform Act, that's what I say, George Floyd Reform Act was what went before Congress. And that bill is still up for debate, but it deals with reforms in some of the training that officers get, and also equity in practices. So are we going to change the way we train officers? Well, we have to. That's without a doubt. something we have to do, but we're doing more training. So some of that training is enhanced. Some people refer to it as de-escalation. I like to call it verbal judo. And for them to communicate with folks. What we're seeing more and more of, and just in my short 2 months, extreme mental health cases that we're having to deal with that I've never seen at this level. And a part of that, I would say, is attributed to COVID. People are not getting FaceTime with their therapists. They're not getting, they're not adjusting to this new normal, and really and they're not taking their meds, and it's becoming so extreme. We've just had we've had to deal with things that we're not used to dealing with. So yeah, training is always something we have to do. It is something that that we're very good at in our agency, and we're getting better. But I can't tell you that we'll ever have enough time to get done what we need to get done. But we're working really hard to change the way we talk to people and how we respond to certain situations.
My other question was, and you passed by this a little earlier, do you make sure that your officers always wear their body cams and have them turned on? Or is that not the policy? Yeah.
No, it is the policy. Yeah,
Okay.
they're required when they're dealing with the public to have their body cams on. Yeah.
Good. Transparency. Thank you.
Next up is Susan Thomas.
Yes, Libby's questions got into my question, but something that you just said, Sheriff, triggered a thought for me to ask about with the mental health situation, which is something I've dealt with in my personal life when my son had to be arrested by an officer to be taken in to a hospital at one point in his life, which was very traumatic for all of us. And I know, and there's a lot of intricacies to all of that, but are you looking at, or do you currently have really well-trained more of a therapist on staff that would be part of that or lead that situation, as opposed to having a uniformed officer put someone in handcuffs to take them in? And I know some communities are doing that. And kind of a tie into that, will some of this funding that's coming down from the Biden administration's American Rescue Plan help you put programs like that into place? And what else are you thinking about doing with funding that might be coming to the county at the federal level from programs like that program and programs like that?
Susan, thanks for bringing that up. So the situation that you're talking about, when you refer to somebody came and arrested my son and put him in the hospital, we don't arrest people to put them in a hospital. We do detain them and we transport them based on a probate order signed by a judge. So that's what would have happened. What would be more disturbing is that we arrest them because they're in mental health crisis and put them in a jail. We don't do that because you probably know the largest mental health facility right now in Charleston County is the detention center, unfortunately, because we lack these resources. So we have an exceptional group of people trained, a small group. It's called our therapeutic transport team, that are trained to handle this, but they're not trained to the level of a physician or a therapist. You asked if we have somebody on staff, a therapist on staff. No, we have a mental health professional on staff with us that handles a lot of these calls that we go on, but it's one person, and these calls happen 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it's not enough. In addition to that, we have what's called we have access to mobile crisis through mental health. We identify somebody that is in crisis, in a mental health crisis, we contact them and they come out. So it's not that we don't have the resources. We do have the resources to deal with it in an emergency basis. It's where we go from there that is where we struggle. I am one of those people that are adamantly opposed to law enforcement transporting from hospital to hospital. That is not our job. Unfortunately, the law requires us to do that right now. That is something I'm advocating to change, because that is, understand that if somebody's violent, we want to be there to help protect everybody involved to get them where they need to be. But I have been involved more than a dozen occasions where that getting them to the hospital was in their best interest, and me going hands-on with somebody was not. And I've had to call for EMS, or for a mobile crisis, or both at the same
Right.
time, to come deal with that person. So we do have the ability to do that now. We will continue to get to your question about the new CARES Act. I don't know. I don't know that there's any money that'll help us as much as it'll help maybe mental health, and give them more resources and funding, because they're really they struggle too with funding.
Well, one of the reasons why I'm bringing in the CARES Act is that anything COVID related and mental health crisis that you've described, must be connected to COVID situation right now. So that might be a gateway for you. It's a thought there.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a correlation with the rise in calls that we've gotten and the manic at which these calls, the manner that they're just so manic now, and it's just really, really difficult. It's becoming more difficult to deal with.
Thank you. Next question is from Ray and Ellie Setzer.
Hi, Kristen. This is Butch Setzer's mom. He got me to support you because of your participation in rugby. This is one tough lady we're talking to here. Anyway, I've always been an advocate for women's rights, and I wondered how many of your deputies are female. And I also wondered what agency does the training for our deputies.
Hi, Ellie, neighbor, and Ray. They live right around the corner from me. So it's great to see you guys. I just saw Butch a couple weeks ago. We were down at Hampton Park, and I tweaked my knee because we were running around throwing a ball. So, so great. Thank you for asking that. When I first became sheriff, somebody said, what is your goal? And I said, my goal was to make sure I'm not the last, and to start lifting people up that have been left behind for many reasons. But how many people are in my agency are women? So not enough. We are hiring right now. We're on a hiring campaign. I have filled since coming into office. I had 20 vacancies. I am down to 14 or 15 now. So, and prior to me coming in, we had 7 or 8 still in the academy that finish up, I think, next week. So out of those folks that have come in, I think we only have 4 women. And when I took office, the 30 minutes after I was sworn in, I swore in a chief deputy or chief at the jail, who is a woman, Abigail Duffy. I swore in my chief deputy for the law enforcement side, Joyce Smith, who is an African-American female. And I swore in my chief general counsel, Chandra Scott, who is an African-American female. So that was within 30 minutes. So we made a significant impact. We don't have enough women. I brought in I promoted a woman as a recruiter that was in our detectives division. She is now the face of the agency. She's an African-American woman. And we have just made some internal changes and lifted these folks up. Another promotion I made 30 minutes after was an LGBTQ woman and an African-American man who had been overlooked many, many times. These are the people now making the decisions in the agency. So there's not enough, and we're not at the we're not definitely not at the population that would conform with what we have here in Charleston, which is just over 50% women, but we're working on it. And we're trying to use that data to make sure we hire more women, that we lift them up, that we train them, and not just women, and minorities in general. We want at least a 35% African-American population within our walls. We're not there yet, but we're getting there, and it's just a process. But that's what happened inside of 2 months. So I think we're well on our way.
Great, thank you very much, Sheriff. If I remember rightly, Chandra Scott actually gave a forum here at the church some time ago when she was appointed head of the ACLU in Charleston. Is that the same person?
Yes.
Yeah, it is. Okay, great. So Kevin Gainey, you had a question, but I think it might have been asked already about body cams.
Yeah, can I ask a question to go along with that though instead?
Go ahead.
Just a question about your body cam policy. I've always felt that, you know, officers and deputies are entitled to a certain amount of privacy. They don't need to be recording themselves while they're just sitting in their squad car alone. So how do you, but I can also see how it would be easy to forget to turn that back on when you then go to interact with the public, particularly if something, you know, something happens quickly and they have to react quickly. So how do you deal with deputies who don't turn their body cams on or forget to do that? Are they disciplined or reprimanded in any way?
Yeah, Kevin, it's sort of a new thing. But yeah, unfortunately they are. If they don't turn their body cam on or forget to do it, or they even let it go if it dies on them, battery wise, they're responsible for charging it, wearing it, downloading it, and turning it on. And unfortunately, if that doesn't happen, there are repercussions. So yeah, they are disciplined, but they're constantly reminded by their supervisors about policy about that. And it does happen, and it's unfortunate, but it is our policy, and it's just something like it's like you know, getting up and going to fix coffee in the morning. It's just muscle memory. They just have to get used to it, and we have less problem with that than we do the audio and technical stuff itself, because sometimes it breaks. But that's not their fault. We realize that, but we do have some pretty entertaining videos when they forget to turn it off and they're doing things privately. So we have to screen all that to make sure we remind them when we see that they had their body cam was on. And usually they'll be the ones that go, you know, I forgot to turn my body cam off and I was kissing my wife goodbye. And anyway, so we make sure we monitor that so it doesn't get out there.
Turning it off might be as much of a problem as failing to turn it on. That's interesting. Diane Narkunas has the next question, and after that will be Bill Epps. So Diane, if you want unmute and ask.
Good morning. There's been a long history of corruption in sheriff's offices in South Carolina. So who's responsible for the oversight of these offices, and what's being done to combat this corruption?
You know, right after I was sworn in, I had to attend a sheriff's school in Columbia, and the Sheriff's Association was the one in charge of putting that school on. So, you know, it's unfortunate that there's and I don't think this is right, but this is the way the law is written. There's this enormous power that goes with the office of sheriff, and there's very little oversight. In fact, you all are the oversight, the voters. And so when this corruption happens, and it happens because people get greedy, they get self-absorbed, and they forget who they work for, and then they do something really stupid, and publicly it's news. It's a newsmaker. I'm sure there was more of it before I came along, but I think in South Carolina we've had 7 or 8 sheriffs that have made national news for public corruption. So the oversight of that is the coroner is the only person in the state that can arrest the sheriff. So if hey, I didn't make the law the way it is, because the coroner is an elected official, and the coroner has to become a certified law enforcement officer within a year of their appointment. So they have to go through school for that as well. So the coroner can make the arrest, but the indictments can come from the state level, from the Attorney General's office generally, but other state agencies can investigated, a sheriff. SLED can investigate them, but generally it goes to a different level because of the conflict there. So that's, so if there's a report of wrongdoing, generally it goes to SLED first. SLED will then remove themselves and ask the Attorney General's office to do it, to do an investigation.
Thank you very much. Wonderful answer again. Bill Epps is next up, and after that it'll be Heath Hoffman. So Bill, if you want to unmute and ask.
Great. Kristen, so great to see you. Love your vision. Thanks so much for being here. My question has to do with the Juvenile Detention Center. I'm just, if you could update us on progress and where it's at, where it's going. Thank you.
Yeah, Bill, it's so good to see you. I miss everybody so much. It's like when I see these familiar faces, I get so excited. So Bill's talking about he called it the Juvenile Detention Center. We're going to stop using that language because that's not what it is. It is the Youth Development Center that we're building in Charleston County. It is it's being built. The foundation was poured the day after I was sworn in. They started pouring the foundation, and I acted really quickly to change the design of this facility that had been modeled after a correctional based model. I fought hard. I'm still fighting. If any of you, some of you I know have been to the current detention center, it's an open based structure and it's really not conducive for any kind of learning environment. The new center was modeled after that. So I am fighting still to change the design. We met with the architect, or meeting again with architects tomorrow to get them to take what became a 72 bed facility and become a 60 bed facility, and to add that one wing for programming, for mental health, for clinical medical services and counseling, both individual and group therapy counseling sessions. So we're redesigning it to bring more programs inside the facility so that we have wraparound services on site. The county has been decent to work with, and just Friday or Thursday, I guess it was, Chairman Pryor wanted an update on the facility because he had heard that some changes were being requested, and he actually asked the staff to submit the architectural drawing and get on it. So we are trying to model something that's never been done in this country. We've called the people from Oregon to Lake Charles, Louisiana, who have really good programs, and asked, what would you do differently if you could change anything? And these are successful programs. And we've taken the best of everything they've given us and put it under one facility. So the intention is to be to lead the country and build this facility in a rehabilitative facility based on alternatives to detention, but not detention. So we're working towards. I'm fighting really hard. I'll call you if I need help. I might need backup at County Council, but it looks like the changes are being made, and as much as they fought in the beginning, they're fighting less now with Chairman Pryor intervening.
That's wonderful. Sounds like a fantastic vision. Next up actually is Diane Narkunis and then Heath Hoffman.
Good morning, Sheriff Kristen. I'm so glad to see you. I have a question about how you interact with the Charleston and North Charleston police chiefs.
Thanks, Diane. I'm so glad you asked this. In fact, I spoke to Luther Reynolds yesterday. He's probably sick and tired of me calling him and him calling me, but we are actually working together right now and with Chief Burgess and Mount Pleasant Chief Ritchie. We're working together to bring our resources together to combat some real serious issues here in Charleston County. One of those issues being gun violence and gang violence that has increased. You know, through COVID, we have found that we had gang issues, prior to COVID, but COVID has really given these what we considered local gangs time to organize, and they're actually taking orders from the West Coast of California, and they're taking orders from New York and Atlanta. And we know this is happening. They're very well organized. Gun violence is at an all-time high right now. So the four of us, along with Berkeley County Sheriff Lewis, are working together to try to get a plan together to defeat this or to combat it. It's a real problem here. But those are folks that I call weekly, and they call me weekly, and we're working really well together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Heath, unmute yourself and you can go ahead.
Good morning, Sheriff. It's nice to meet you via Zoom. And I had a question about the resistance to the changes you're implementing. I can't imagine a bigger difference between your predecessor, Dirty Harry, and sort of your approach to policing. And resistance to organizational change is always a common element to change. And so I'm curious how your vision is being received and what kind of resistance there's been to the changes you're implementing and aspiring to implement.
Thank you, Heath. I love that name, by the way, Heath Hoffman. That sounds almost like a candy bar. Resistance to change. I mean, that's kind of in our DNA, right? As humans, a lot of people resist change. But I just had an interview with Carolyn Murray, and one of the questions she threw out there was, you fired a lot of people when you came in the door. And I did not fire a lot of people at all. I just didn't invite them to the party. Okay. And so when my term started, because I'm the sheriff and people that work for me are really an extension of me, what they do is my responsibility, and I can personally be held liable for it. I had to make sure that people that were working under the umbrella of the sheriff were people that I trusted. And there were just some people that I was not going to continue that relationship with. So I didn't fire them. I just didn't invite them to continue. So many of them moved on, and some retired as a result of that. So are there still resistors? Probably silently, yeah, there are some, but I think we're building a good enough team right now that I will tell you, when I met with every single deputy sheriff and detention officer prior to taking office, and I met with them in an effort to tell them my vision. And if they weren't going to be a part of that and they weren't going to buy into that, then they didn't have to. I wasn't going to force the issue, but there were other places that probably could use their services. So when I went to the detention center, for instance, I got a standing ovation because this is something that they had not ever heard, nor had they seen a sheriff visit the detention center as much as I've been over there. And then on the law side, there's been this division between the two. What we've done is try to bring everyone back together and give them a voice. I'm hosting diversity forums twice a month right now. And we're bringing in people. Our first forum, they're face to face, and we have a room that only holds 48 people, socially distanced. But our first forum was so successful, we had to start Zooming and doing face to face because there just wasn't enough room. So now you're finding people that want to talk, and they have this vision that they share, and they have these ideas. So we're bringing them together. We're bringing them to the table, and I think for the first time in my career, I've seen more smiling faces when I walk through that building than I've ever seen in my life as a law enforcement officer. So we still have work to do. I mean, this was just the beginning of the conversations. We're going to keep those going.
Great. I read that somebody wrote a very snotty email to you, and they said he was going to have to retire early in 2022, and you just said, well, why bother waiting? Why didn't you just go now? Which struck me as a fairly appropriate response to somebody who was trying to bully you even after your election.
Let me tell you about that. I mean, that was the number 2 person in charge of the sheriff's office under Sheriff Cannon. He no longer is there. He left the day before I was sworn in. So it's people like that were not invited to the party. They didn't share the vision. They were toxic to the organization.
Yeah.
He treated me like this as a sheriff-elect. Imagine how he treated the rest of the staff. So
Right.
Just indicative of the culture that existed.
Yeah. So I think we've probably got time for only one more question, which will come from Libby Smith. Libby, unmute. Libby. Libby's
Okay.
question was, what's your relation to county council?
I was just curious because you said there's nobody over you, but you were working with them on something. Do you have responsibilities or do they help fund you or?
Yeah, so county council, they're all elected officials as well. And they are responsible, basically bless my budget. That's the responsibility.
Well, money is a big power there. So, yeah.
And because of that facility, there's a chance that it could cost more money than what we had originally anticipated because of the changes. So
Right.
they're kind of helping us navigate that, how we can make that happen. So they've been a great help.
Since you've been so good at answering these questions without any flim-flam, Sheriff, there's probably one more question you can take from Ron Malcolm. Ron, if you want to unmute.
Hi, Sheriff. Thanks so much for meeting with us. This has been awesome. I just have a question for you. What are your plans for retention and recruitment? I know it's so hard to recruit identify the right kind of person and to then be able to actually recruit that person and keep them here in Charleston doing a good job for us. Do you have any vision for how that should go?
Oh yeah, thanks for asking. And I think the first week I came in, I created a Bureau of Recruitment, Diversity and Inclusion. So, and I brought in a female, Danielle Rainey, who is the face of our recruitment. Captain Rita Avila oversees that unit. And we merged the detention recruitment with the law enforcement recruitment. So we have a bigger unit now. We're branching out. And that has been something that I'm very, very passionate about, getting the right people in positions, getting people that look like the community into the organization. I use every chance I can to invite people to apply, especially in our detention center where I have over 100 positions I need to fill, or right at 100 positions. But what I've learned is, we need to meet people where they are. And so we've been very creative going out into the communities, casting specific nets in targeting certain communities that we want input and representation from. So that's what we've been doing. On Saturday coming up, this Saturday, we will be doing a grocery drive with a couple other partners here in Charleston County in West Ashley. But at each one we do 1 to 2 a month grocery drives. We also do application fairs, not job fairs, application fairs. We actually go to folks and help them fill out the applications and to make sure they have they do it correctly. So, I've learned that not everyone has access, and we know that, and not everyone knows based on that access that there are jobs out there, very good jobs. And so that's what we're doing. We're going to meet people where they are, and we've done it at our COVID vaccination clinics. We provide transportation. We've partnered with Fetter Healthcare to be the transportation arm of folks that can't get to these clinics. And when we do that, we also have our recruiters doing all the driving and actually meeting people at these clinics so that we can target people, especially in the outlying areas of Charleston County. So that's something we're building on, and it was done week 1, and that was a priority.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Sheriff Graziano. Your answers really have been just so wonderfully direct and empty of politicians' fudge. I'm sure everybody can see that you are going to do an absolutely terrific job, and I think I can probably guarantee you the support of everybody in the Unitarian Church. This has been a wonderful session, and I'm seeing a whole bunch of thank yous popping up in the chat now. I'm going to go to the gallery view so everybody can wave and smile and say thank you, and everybody can see everybody else. But this was a terrific session. We're really, really grateful. Very, very happy that you're in this position, and we're really looking forward to significant change and working, with the Charleston Area Justice Ministry and all of the other things that the Unitarian Church is involved with. I'm going to stop the recording at this point, but I'm going to let people stick around for a little while, so there's no longer recording.